so good to be with you on this edition of the India Development Debate right here on ET Now. I'm Supriya, Shrinate, and with me in Mumbai is my colleague and co-anchor Sandeep Gurumurthi. Let's put the spotlight on the big event of the day then. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is indeed reaching out to Indian industry. In a closed-door meeting with top honchos of corporate India in Mumbai, Modi sought frank opinions from industry on his government's performance on the policy front, and the likes of Mukesh Ambani, Deepak, Parekh, Anand, Mahindra, Birla, amongst many others, pitched for a big thrust on reforms, even as they raised a toast to the government on the GST rollout. Industry veterans have also offered to walk alongside the centre for development of backward districts. One issue that dominated the discussions is the last mile connectivity. As far as reform measures are concerned, sector-specific issues were also raised during this very high-profile meeting.
Now, this is Prime Minister Modi's first such exercise to reconnect with India Inc. ahead of the upcoming Lok Sabha elections. The NDA government, which stormed to power in 2014 with the full backing of corporate India, ran into issues of trust deficit in recent months. Be it demonetization or the GST rollout, companies were not very happy with the events on the ground, with the twin reforms taking a toll on business confidence and the demand situation. Back-to-back scams and the big bank crisis made matters only worse, while external shocks like high fuel prices pose new risks to the economy. The PM's tete-e-tete with India Inc. That's the topic of discussion tonight on the India Development Debate. Joining us are four special guests. We've got no politicians on the panel, four bright minds. Well, they were not part of the meeting, so to that extent they can speak more frankly and candidly on the road ahead for corporate India and the trust deficit, whether or not there's one between India Inc. and the government. Joining us on the show this evening, Nainalal Kidwai, Chairperson Max Financial Services, eminent corporate leader; Sanjeev Aga, corporate commentator; R. Jagannathan, editorial director of Swaraj Magazine; and Sadanand Dume, resident fellow, American Enterprise Institute. Let me start with you, Jaggi. Was this the Prime Minister's effort to fix a broken relationship, or should I say a strained relationship with industry ahead of 2019? The same industry that sort of, backed him so strongly in 2014 doesn't appear to be as gung-ho now as it did in 2014. So is this sort of an effort to mend that relationship, Jaggi?
Yes, I think so, because if you see, the Prime Minister Modi has been completely different from the Gujarat Chief Minister that business always knew, and they thought they were putting the Gujarat Chief Minister as the Prime Minister and that he will follow the kind of market-friendly, business-friendly policies that he displayed. He actually managed to meet almost every passing businessman in the state. But in the last 4 years, he has practically made himself scarce whenever business has been around. And in fact, even though he has not been anti-business, but he has banished all kinds of middlemen from the corridors of power. Plus, he seldom meets businessmen on a one-to-one thing, except on social occasions like a inauguration of something or the other. So, business feels cut off from the Prime Minister's years, and I think the Prime Minister realized that his stock has never been lower with India Inc., not least because of the double balance sheet problem, which has been very slow to be fixed, and it is only now slowly being fixed, and it might take another year or so till business sees the light of day. Yes, I think deficit in trust is high right now, and I think the Prime Minister is trying to mend fences. I think largely he's been trying to play to a political gallery where he did not want to be seen as a suit boot ki sarkar, and unfortunately that jibe has actually carried through into policy and to counter that. So I think he needs to make mention. He doesn't have to be pro-business in any crony side, but he needs to understand their real issues if he wants to fix India and start growth, bring jobs back.
No, I think you've really hit the nail on its head. The suit boot ki jibe, perhaps from politics carried on to policy. And this is Mr. Modi's big attempt to resurrect that relationship. But let me take this across to Sanjeev Aga. And Mr. Aga, we've been given to understand by people, and very high profile people who were present at that meeting, that the Prime Minister started off by saying in Hindi that khul ke boliyega, nahi to aapka aur hamara dono ka samay nasht hoga. How is one to read this outreach by the Prime Minister, where he's actually coaxing Indian industry to speak frankly, to speak candidly, to speak freely?
I would nuance my answer. On the one hand, if, as Jaggi says, there was a feeling that there was a little degree of frigidity in the communication, then to that extent any communication is good. But on the other hand, you know, a disparate group of 20-25 people meeting the Prime Minister is not going to lead to any breakthrough or any new discovery or any new insight. So, I think it is a good exercise in just having communication, but I would not attach too much importance to it moving the needle in any real way.
That's an important point you're making. I mean, let's not lose sight of the big picture. We must see this in the broader context. 20-25 people, no matter how influential and powerful, meeting the Prime Minister is not going to move the needle, even though from the optics point of view, it was an important signal from the Prime Minister and the government. But Nana Alkidbe, how big a deal is this for corporate India that in some sense has been craving for an audience with the Prime Minister? As Jaggi said, you know, they've not got the kind of, attention and focus that many thought that they would get. And the first thing that CEOs that we spoke to told us was that he should do this more often. So how big a deal is this for corporate India in some sense?
I think it's a pretty big deal. It's a pretty big deal because corporate India has been used to these interactions. The fact is that these interactions, even at a group level, are not happening at the frequency at which they have happened in previous governments, or indeed with Prime Minister Modi in his previous incarnation. And many of these groups knew him well then. Exactly as Jaggi said, I mean, the reasons, his need to keep a distance and frankly his own schedule would have certainly kept him away from the frequency as what he did as Chief Minister. But I think with the passage of time, maybe even the comfort of industry. After all, there are issues that need resolution, and I don't necessarily mean crony capitalism at all. These are big businesses that have been around for decades, which need clarification, need a helping hand, need sorting through. And not everything can be done at the hands of a bureaucrat or a minister, and some issues are across ministries. So you need resolution at a level which brings that coordination together. And if access is not readily there, industry does get nervous, does feel less welcome. And don't forget, many of these groups are Indian multinationals, and they are welcomed at a level where, you know, we have heard historically that people like at the Birla Group and at Kumar Mangalam Birla's level in some of the Asian countries were really welcomed, you know, even with ministers turning up at airports when visited, etc. So there is a welcoming that happens, and I think it's very important that industry feels welcome here. So the fact that the Prime Minister has had this outreach is critical. I hope we will see more of these. These are but group meetings. The one-on-one meetings are equally critical, and I think everybody in the country, whether media, ministers, bureaucrats, have to frankly accept that a few rotten eggs, and there's clearly been a few rotten eggs in corporate India, doesn't mean that everybody has to be seen through that same lens. And we do need industry, we need industry to feel comfortable, and the interactions should not be cut short.
Oh, absolutely. The interaction needs to keep flowing for investments to flow in, because investment is after all an act of faith, and we're going to touch upon that topic a little later. But you hit the nail with it on its head when you said that, you know, the industry needs to be interacted with. But let me take this across to Sadanand, and I sometimes wonder, why did that interaction suddenly stop? And Sadanand, has Mr. Modi, who came on the plank of development, many thought he was this free market thinker, someone who was seen to be cozy with industrialists, comfortable with Indian industry, did he consciously shed his pro-industry image? Has he consciously worked hard to drop the pro-capitalist perception that he came to office with?
Yeah, I'm just going to, let me echo Jaggi's comments. I think that that's precisely what happened. The Chief Minister of Gujarat was known for his, can-do, roll-up-the-sleeves, red carpet for business image. And the Prime Minister of India has, frankly been something of the opposite. The turning point was indeed the 2015 loss in Delhi, Rahul Gandhi's jibe about Jhoot Ki Sarkar, and frankly, Congress should be held responsible for that too. But the ultimate responsibility is the Prime Minister's. If he had shown more confidence, he should have said that, yes, I want all Indians to be able to wear a suit if they please, and I want India to thrive and prosper. Instead, he retreated into a shell. He surrounded himself with bureaucrats. This is the most bureaucratic heavy government we have seen since in the liberalization era. And frankly, we've seen that in some play out in policy. You can tell the business, you can tell your bureaucrats to create ease of doing business, but you can't really create ease of doing business unless you get inputs from businessmen, the people who are actually affected. I think this government has been extremely disappointing in that regard. One hopes that this is a move towards some kind of correction, but I fear that this is mostly a question of optics heading into the 2019 election.
Okay, you're saying it's more about optics heading into 2019 elections. Now, Mr. Aga, we're given to understand that the meeting kicked off with the interim finance minister Piyush Goyal making a brief presentation to the 30-odd powerful CEOs in the room that included Mukesh Ambani, Kumar Birla, Deepak, Parekh and Anand Mahindra. But I'm trying to wonder what would have been Piyush Goyal's pitch to these leaders of Indian industry. I mean, Saaf Niyat, Sahi Vikas is what the government is going to the public with. Would that have been the pitch to India Inc. as well? And would this crowd have bought that pitch?
I don't want to go into at the moment ease of doing business and demonetization and GST and things of that nature, because they've been discussed enough, and surely things of could have been facilitated to be much more efficiently handled in those matters. But what strikes me at the end of 4 years of this government is the absence of something imaginative. Now, I met Mr. Goyal when he was in the opposition, and he was a man who was full of ideas in terms of the potential of education, the potential of healthcare, tourism, corridors, and things of new cities. And these could have been such enormous drivers of the economy, of employment, and you don't need a lot of money if you do it with imagination. Now, somewhere we haven't done anything new. If you look at the last 20 years, India has had impulses. We've had the BPO industry, we've had the IT services industry, which actually completely changed southern and western India, urban India. Then you had telecom, which changed all of India. And these were GDP drivers, they were employment drivers, and they were social change drivers. And there is a lot of repressed demand. There is demand by the citizens backed by money and spending power in all these sectors. As I mentioned, tourism, that is international, otherwise healthcare, education. With a little imagination, these could have been opened up. Now, it's too late with just 10 or 11 months to go, but that is what has disappointed me. And that is to some extent why we are struggling with rather mediocre growth rate.
No, I understand you need out of the box ideas, you need innovation, you also need a certain amount of fearlessness to promote that kind of growth. And I think fearful decision making is never going to get us there, and which is why I'm following up this question with Jaggi. And Jaggi, I guess the thing about these meetings is not always who attended, but also who wasn't invited. There was no Chanda Kochar, there was no Shikha Sharma in the meeting, and both are postal ladies of Indian industry. In fact, I'm given to understand there was only one lady present in that room. It does give you a sense of the mood in New Delhi. This is a government that is acutely conscious of optics. And do you believe this is one of its weaknesses?
Yes, in fact, you are bang on as far as that is concerned. This government does not want to be seen as being on the side of people who are even suspected of possibly some kind of wrongdoing or bad posturing in terms of their business positioning. So I think the PM's exclusion of these two ladies, both of whom were icons till recently and now have got into a bad face. Actually, exclusion was not a good thing, but anyway, I suppose the problem I think with Mr. Modi now is, I think it is okay for him to be a chowkidar and a guardian of probity and anti-corruption flag and all that stuff. But I think you cannot make the whole government into a morality play. The minute you do that, you have to deal with corruption and black money in a slow and gentle way, so that over a period of time it disappears. You can't try to deal with it in one term and put fear everywhere and try and block this and do that kind of a thing and send people to jail or do whatever it is. And I think once you create that fear, there is not going to be any animal spirit. People are quietly going to move out of the country, and last year we lost last few years we have lost 23,000 millionaires. Some of them may have gone for better prospects, but many of them might have been seeing that, look, I think we might get more harassed here than if we settle somewhere else. I think that's not a good feeling for India to have, especially the rich. They are the ones who are going to create jobs, and I think they should, Mr. Modi needs to make amends for that. Not that you have to give up your anti-corruption drive, but you cannot make it so in your face that people feel threatened that anything they do might go wrong. You know, that's not the way to build confidence in business.
Do you agree with Jaggi there? I know Sadanand for sure would, but Naina, do you agree with Jaggi there? The fact that some of this, some of the drive of the government, some of the the direction in which it has taken steps, the manner in which it's sort of gone about cracking down the NPA crisis has alienated a large influential section of the industry, one that sort of invests a lot of money, or that's traditionally invested a lot of money, and in some sense it was perhaps a deliberate decision because the government wanted to send a signal, and we could debate the merits and demerits of it, but the bigger question is, was it worth the trade-off?
I think, we have to say that any government, and it was mentioned that with the desire to distance himself from any, so-called wrongdoers, I mean, which government wouldn't do that? So to my mind, that is critical. The one time willy-nilly, he got caught in a photograph in Davos with Nirav Modi. I mean, media went mad about it, right? So, of course, he must be careful, and India and all its leaders need to be careful. I think the issue, though, and I wouldn't mix it up with the NPA matters either. The difference is there are willful defaulters in the country, there are defaulters, and there's good business. And that distinction is what is critical. Because you have willful defaulters doesn't mean all business is bad. And I don't think business that is not in that NPA pocket is, in itself worried about the way government is going against NPAs. But yes, those that are part of a deal where they are in fact defaulters, willful or not, they do have cause for worry. And I can't say I have issue with that either. So the issue here is that for the people who were in the room, and we who were invited because they are big business, right business, business with the ability to invest in India, and to understand from them what else government can do to make them invest is critical. The distinction between them and others is critical. And the pity of it is, and by the way, India has been through these cycles before, where all of business gets bracketed as questionable or bad. And if that is beginning to happen, we need to worry. We need to worry if a bureaucrat is nervous about meeting business, whether good or bad, because what he thinks is okay today may not look so good tomorrow. So he doesn't meet, or he doesn't agree, or he doesn't sanction, and decision making stops. And therefore, the mistrust that exists between industry, bureaucracy, and government, and by government I mean ministerial and the political class, has to be mended at every level so that the communication and the trust comes back with a view to people using their heads a little more in terms of, okay, these guys are NPAs because we did something wrong on regulation, and we did. I mean, some companies went bad because coal suddenly stopped, right, which was all in government's hands, not because they were wrong. So we do need to really not treat everyone in the same bucket, and I fear there's a bit of, a big broad brush and branding therein, which needs to change at every level.
Right. I couldn't agree more with you. There needs to be differentiation, there needs to be a more nuanced approach, and there can't be this big brush that you paint everybody with. But let me just talk to you about the reasons of this meeting, Sadanand. And I'm a journalist, I'm licensed to be skeptic. Anand Mahindra comes out of that meeting and tweets that 45 minutes of unhurried conversation over tea, a break away from budget meetings, free exchange of ideas took place. But you and I both know that there are no free lunches, none in this world. Isn't projecting an industry-friendly image crucial, as the government and in fact the party will try and raise funds for elections 2019? You do need big money. While corporate India did place their bets with him as far as 2014 is concerned, does he expect the same resources in 2019? Was this also an attempt to reach out to the big, deep pockets?
Yes and no. I mean, I think he's in a, frankly, the Prime Minister is in a much stronger position now than he was 5 years ago. 5 years ago, he was coming out, he was an opposition leader. He really needed to woo business. I thought he did a very good job of that. Now, really, he has the cards. So, if you had to sort of, put it bluntly, in 2013, I think a lot of business was probably motivated by hope. In 2018, they may be motivated more by fear, but they're still going to cough up. So I don't think that he really, I don't think that he's in a weak position when it comes to seeking funding for his campaign. He holds all the cards, number one. Number two, I think that despite disappointments with him, at least the businessmen I speak with, there is still a general sense that he is their best bet. I think, in fact, the pundit class and economic commentators and so on have been much more critical because we tend to view things against a benchmark of either harebrained decisions like demonetization or undone or reforms that have not proceeded. Businessmen tend to take a more sort of, practical, rooted in reality view. And it's not as though they are as enthusiastic about Modi as they were 5 years ago. They are clearly disappointed also, but they still sort of see this as, the least worst option or the best of the bad options available.
That's a wonderful point you're making, and we do want to debate that a little bit further in the show on the fact that is he still their best bet, and is that going to guide the way corporate India reacts? But Jaggi, I want to react to the point made there by Sadanand and the larger point on how would corporate India judge him. The kind of pro-market reforms that India may have expected, and the ones that you have written a lot about, that Sadanand writes a lot about, whether it's land reform, labor reform, privatization of Air India, half-hearted attempt, started too late, gave it up too early, so we haven't seen the government really move on the kind of reforms that that corporate India would coming really looking at subsidy rationalization in a holistic manner. We haven't seen that. So how is India Inc. going to judge this government's performance over the 4 years?
I think they'll judge him primarily by 2 or 3 things. One is they believe that his intent is broadly correct and that he wants to clean up the place and he does not want to allow too much corruption and hanky-panky in government's dealings with business. I think that message has gone through. The point is, I think in a recent survey conducted by a business newspaper, I think CEO said that, look, let him not focus on 85 different initiatives. Let him say these are my 5 signature tunes and I am going to put them through in my 5 years. What has happened is you got Digital India, Stand Up India, Sit Up India, Startup India, all kinds of thousands of things, each operating at a suboptimal level. So you are not actually able to make a huge impact. I mean, with the exception of 2 things, probably GST and possibly the IBC, which will probably have very large impacts over a period of time. I mean, it's difficult to see what thing is, I mean, most initiatives nobody can object to. But the point is he spread himself too thin, where I think results in each one of them will be either suboptimal or come after a very large time, which is why I think CEOs have some disquiet, but they still think he is the best bet because the after me the deluge, I think you have complete chaos on the other side. They are the only united by the need to remove Mr. Modi from power, and the politics of that kind of a thing is even scarier than what thing. So disappointed or not, I think India Inc. will stay with Mr. Modi, but I think they wish they would focus on 4 or 5 things that are most crucial now rather than try to spread himself too thin. I think that's the way they will judge him.
Okay, let me just go across to Sanjeev Aga and ask the counter question. While industry will judge Mr. Modi for not being able to deliver on some of the impossible promises that were made in 2014, but does corporate India also have a lot to answer for, Mr. Aga? It can't deny the unholy corporate banker political nexus that's out in the public domain in the form of 8 lakh crore worth of NPAs. I mean, the Indian economy couldn't take off because the banks couldn't lend, twin balance sheet problems, and all of this amounts to this very, very crony nexus that existed. Can Indian industry shrug off its share of the blame?
No, Supriya, of course it can't, and at the end of the day, we are all from the same cross section of society. So the political class, the bureaucratic class, the promoter class is not dramatically different, either in their measure of cleanliness or probity or whatever. You know, the way to the point which strikes me, and if you were to ask me that, you know, what does corporate India think, frankly, it's very hard, because CEOs or promoters are not going to confide their innermost thoughts to all of us. To some extent, we are projecting our own view upon them. But the larger question you are asking, that is corporate India above blame? No, it is not. Political class above blame? No, it is not. We are all part of it together. To some extent, I think we are rooted still in last few decades. I think change in India is going to come not necessarily from the people sitting in the room, big though they are and worthy though they are. There is a lot of energy happening in new sectors. There is a lot of energy happening in, you know, startups. I have interaction with them, much younger people, and I think some of the champions of India are going to come from them. And I already mentioned in the beginning of this program some of the sectors where there are a lot of latent opportunities. I think to some extent we are still looking at yesteryear's problems. Of course, they have to be licked, the NPAs have to be licked, but the solutions to improving employment, to improving growth, to improving social well-being are beyond this, you know, this old 1950s, 60s promoter. In fact, in India, I often feel that business is treated like as a caste, almost like there is a Brahman caste, there is a Kshatriya caste, there is a Vaishya caste, so is, but that really is not the way the next 20 years are going to be. And I think to some extent the engagement has to become a little more broad-based, a little more across, you know, floating newer ideas, rather than, I am not against this interaction, I feel it was necessary, it's been done well, but as I said right in the beginning, this may not be the forum from where you are going to get meaningful change. You will get redressal, you may get some of the you know, things which are irritating ironed out, but change is not going to happen from here.
That's a fantastic point there, on the fact that change perhaps may not come from this forum, and that there is a different section of the economy from where we will see that magnitude of change. But Ms. Kitba, if I could come to you, and just to pick up the point that Supriya was making earlier on this whole, you know, this whole Saaf Niyat Sahi Vikas pitch as well that the government is giving to the public of this country, and one cannot deny that several moves of the government and the Prime Minister have sort of ensured that rules of doing business in India have changed. Yes, I mean, change takes time, and, you know, Jaggi spoke about GST and IBC, but one gets the feeling that, you know, the way of doing business in India has perhaps changed, and to some extent that there is a new normal when it comes to doing business. Would you agree that that's actually happened, and how uncomfortable do you think is corporate India with this new normal?
I agree that there is a new normal, and I mean, just GST brings a new normal, and that's a fairly obvious one out there. I don't think industry that is big and industry that is in the room today are the ones that worry. But there is a whole section of the other India, the one that worked in a very different way, that has read the writing on the wall. And GST itself, in terms of the net that it has cast wide and across a lot of businesses and a lot of small businesses, is clearly a very important agent of change. And that therefore in itself brings a very important new normal. And I think this new normal should be one and will be one where tax revenues are up, where greater transparency exists, and where the crony capitalism of the past is much better handled. It never goes away. I think it's there in every country completely. But the fact that there's much more transparency in the system and the ability of banks to act, I think if you read the issues today are issues that have developed over a period of time, because the ability to tackle it when it happened, which is pretty much put it straight away into either bankruptcy or a settlement sort of IBC mechanism, would have been ideal even 4 years ago, but the mechanisms didn't exist. So and banks didn't want to take the haircut, so they kept kicking the bucket along, etc. So this whole lesson now will certainly be that banks cannot ever keep on greening the accounts they have, and the ability to settle must happen. So I think this new normal is a very important and good one. I also want to add that, I think there has been some very interesting visioning and going forward by this government. If you look at the whole LPG gas scene, I mean, I can think of how it was always an issue in terms of gas cylinders, availability of gas, etc. And today, the widening of that to ensure that it is given up to cover a much wider group of people on the one hand, and on the other, the freer and more ready availability. Something happened there. Or indeed public procurement, the way public procurement was used for LED lights to actually drive down price, and now the new e-portal that government's developing will enable SMEs and MSMEs, as in smaller companies, to bid in a transparent way on an e-portal, where government procurement will aid and assist these companies on the one hand, and on the other, the system will be transparent, because government is such a large procurer across lots of little and big categories. Now, these are big changes which don't happen overnight,
right.
And we are not able to give credit to a government because it may not happen in the next year or two from the time of implementation, but these change to exactly the new normal that you describe for the future.
Right. You talk about the time of implementation and the results on the ground. I have a follow-up with Sadanand on this. And Sadanand, there is no doubt about the fact that some of the things that Mr. Modi and his government tried to do, like the IBC or the war against NPAs or the GST, will clean up the economy. There is no doubt about that. It will lead to more formalization. It will lead to a more transparent, cleaner economy. But does he run the risk that this may happen over the long term, and he may lack results to reveal of a stellar record over the short term? And that's perhaps what he will be judged on by industry and by the masses.
I mean, let me make two quick points. The first is that, it's perfectly understandable that, after the rot that had set in and the massive scandals we saw under UPA 2, that there really was a public hunger to see governance that was cleaner. And it was the responsibility of Mr. Modi to try and address that. However, I think the government way overcorrected. And if you kind of step back and look at India and where India stands in the world, I think it is absolutely wrong for this government to have kind of fetishized its attack on the so-called cronyism at the cost of wealth creation. The single biggest thing, the most important thing for India is to eradicate poverty and for people to get richer faster. And to drop the ball on that is, frankly, criminal. My second point is that, when it comes to corporate India, I can understand why people, like to view the glass as half full and always find a silver lining in every cloud. But the fact is that, in a sense, corporate India has also failed, the rest of India. I would like to see much more criticism from corporate India. I'd like to see much more of a glass half empty view out there. And don't leave that only to the pundits. Don't leave that only to the columnists. Don't leave that only to the journalists, because it's your job to make the government do better. And so always sort of looking at whatever they're doing as, he's got the right attitude and isn't he putting these things in place? I think that's not productive. What we want to see is, for example, corporate India saying, why do we have one of the highest GST rates in the world? Who has a 28% rate anywhere? Right? Even on average, it's one of the highest. Why has India concocted by far the most complex GST that anyone has anywhere? These are questions that need to be asked, and corporate India ought to be asking them.
Mr. Aga, I'll let you respond to that. And 2 points. One is this trade-off between cronyism and sort of, wealth creation that Sadanand spoke about, and the larger point about corporate India having a voice and looking at it as a glass half empty instead of one as a glass half full.
Interesting question, Sandeep. And just before, I've never met Sadanand, but I'm meeting him on the TV. I invariably agree with him, but I think it was not a fetish to be right. I think if the fetish is to be right and to be just and to be fair, it will always have good results. And I don't think there is such a thing as being too honest. In fact, there's still a lot of, I agree that there are fewer ministers with sticky fingers in this central cabinet, but we all know that election funding is the big elephant in the room, and that does bring in cronyism. So, but I'm not going into that. I think I think the good thing which the government, this government has done is this widespread belief that every second minister is on the take has been removed, which is very, very positive, even though I've voiced a little skepticism about the big picture. But I think where, for example, now just let me take the example of GST. I remember that before GST was launched, for the last 5 years, if anyone asked any one of us as to what is the low hanging fruit which can raise economic activity in India, everyone used to come up with the answer that do GST and you will get a 2% lift. So, it was not as if GST was done with the intention that it will give results 10 years from now. It was done with the intention that it would bring pretty good results in the short and medium and long term. Unfortunately, the competence of the people in understanding or carrying out this change management was not top class. And I just go back to 2 other big changes India has made. 1991, when we had the economic reforms, we always think that Manmohan Singh did it, but there was the industry ministry, there was the commerce ministry, there was the finance ministry, and there were a whole bunch of talented people who worked together and hacked through this difficulty. Similarly, when MODVAT came in the 1990s, there could have been a similar chaos, and we could have said that this will be sorted out, it will take time. But these things have to be anticipated, you've got to get it first time right. And even today, I feel this whole idea in GST of having invoice matching is a utopian idea, and it's not going to happen. And so, these are some of the things which have made it that this is a long term reform. It was not meant to be a long term reform, sure long term, but it was also meant to be good for the short term.
Fair point. Hold that thought, because I'm going to take a very quick question on a specific fiscal economic issue that the Prime Minister spoke about in a speech earlier today. Also, we'll given to understand he spoke about this to captains of Indian industry who were present. And Jaggi, Mr. Modi has resolved to keep the fisc under check. He said there will be no tinkering with the fiscal deficit levels. Is that what he will be judged highly on? And this despite the fact that most of this is on account of the big oil bonanza, the windfall from oil, and not really much of government's own doing. In fact, government was running helter-skelter, not knowing what to do when crude was actually rising.
See, I think every government gets its share of good luck. In the case of UPA too, there was a widespread increase in global trade. There was a huge uplift in things. The stock markets took off from 3,000 Sensex to something like 21,000 in a matter of years. I mean, there was a rising tide that lifted every boat. Sub-Saharan Africa was doing better than India at that time, and so it's not as if UPA won or didn't get the kind of positive thing. Here, the only benefit they got was that of oil prices, which they used sensibly by taxing it higher and fixing the fiscal problem. I mean, that is the most sensible thing to do. I mean, and when you are importing 80% of your food, so they've done the right thing. I don't think we can fault the government on that or grudge them that little bit of luck that they got in terms of oil prices. Every government gets some advantage, and this government got that, and they used it reasonably well. I think they went wrong on other areas, I mean, where I think which sort of crimped growth and various other things. But I think what they did not do wrong was fail to take advantage of the oil bonanza, and they've used it in a correct way.
There with his view on why the government didn't squander the oil windfall as many experts believe they did, but Jaggi believes they did the right thing. In fact, Jaggi also believes that they're doing the right thing now by not bringing down the excise duty on fuel, even though there's a clamour for a cut in price of petrol and diesel. I'll tell you what, we're going to step into a very quick break here, just a 2-minute break. I'll urge the panel to stay with us. On the other side, we'll talk about the TINA factor, the fact that, corporate India may like what they've seen over the last 4 years or may be disappointed, but is Modi still the best bet for India Inc.? That's what we'll debate. On the other side of this very short break, keep it with the India Development Debate.
It's It's so good to be back with you once again on the India development debate. We're putting the spotlight on this high-profile meeting that the Prime Minister did have with some of the tallest captains of Indian industry. But let's talk about the core issues, the issues that this meeting should move the needle on, and one of them has to be investments. Ms. Kidwai, let me start with you. Despite all the talk, ratings upgrade, ease of doing business measures taken, why is it that Mr. Modi has not been able to convince Indian industry to invest? Why don't the same men and women who praise the Prime Minister loosen their purse strings? And what does he really need to do to boost confidence so that the virtuous cycle of investment is put in motion?
So Supriya, we've discussed this before, and clearly the issue is demand and consumption. If capacity utilization sits at 70–75%, as it has indeed sat, and even lower in the past couple of years, no industry is going to invest in the next phase. Industry was over-optimistic when they invested in the first place, expecting this capacity utilization to be a lot higher. So that demand, consumption, growth, which actually deploys capital which has already been put into place, has to kick in, and it hasn't. So as this, and it's picking up. The good news is it's picking up, so we may just see the next cycle of investment, but it's not going to happen in the next year. So investment at that level is important. But I think, we are having the whole discussion right now more around the center and its policies. Industry and where the rubber really hits the road is at the state level. And it's important for certain regulated industries for the center to play a role. And so we see in telecom, some of the consolidation that has happened has clearly happened at the hand of regulation which caused competition and the ability to compete, and therefore, really the sectors coming together into maybe just 3 companies ultimately as players has been a very significant development in the last 2–3 years. Pharma, again, because of certain regulations that are in place, is probably going to see the same consolidation, not all good, I fear. So yes, the center has a role there, but the states actually are critical. And I think what we see, because of the Niti Aayog's rankings and across different parameters, is a competition amongst the states, which is good. And certain states have always done better than others, and dare I say that they continue to do well in terms of attracting investment as a result. So we have to see both in terms of the way they work, the state and the center. And demand, consumption is key. The government, through its budgets, has done a fair bit in terms of investing upfront early in the budget cycles in infrastructure. But in terms of rural demand, which actually carried our economy for the previous government in many ways, that hasn't been there as a driver of consumption and growth. And therefore, some calibrating of this, bringing consumption back is going to be key. Otherwise, capacity utilization is going to be where it is, and investment is not going to return as quick as we would like to see.
Absolutely fair point there on what will it take for investment, for the investment cycle to turn. But Sadanand, again, the government has sort of, I wouldn't use the word gagged, but asked the CEOs who attended the meeting to not speak. But my sense is one of the issues that was perhaps on the table, I hope it was this whole issue of tax terror, as is being made out to be. On the one hand, the government wants to send a signal to corporate India that it means business, and rightly so. And yet there is sort of, this constant complaint that we hear from Indian industry on the sort of overreach by the tax department and the non-transparent manner in which it continues to work and engage with corporate India. That is something that you believe Modi needs to fix, because that will be seen as a confidence-boosting move?
Yeah, but Sandeep, I think it's even deeper than that, right? I mean, it's really about how Modi sees the nature of the instrument he is wielding. Now, if you look at many of his policy decisions, you get the impression that he thinks that he has the Danish civil service and the Singapore tax authorities at his command. Sadly, that is not the truth. So, if he had a more realistic sense of the instrument he was wielding, he would have understood that part of the problem is bureaucratic overreach, inefficiency, and corruption. And he needs to get these factors out of the way of business so that business can go out and do what it does best: invest, create jobs, create wealth, and so on. But if he instead believes that the problem lies on the business side and the bureaucrats who are working for him are somehow all perfect, you end up with the kinds of policies we've seen. I would say that's true of ease of doing business, where the businessman has really not been central. It's really been much more about bureaucrats trying to kind of game these rankings. You would see that in the approach towards taxation. In fact, I would say that is the single best example where the kind of draconian powers that have been given to tax officials are just completely out of line if what you're trying to do is release people's animal spirits. The only animal spirits that are being released are of the tax authorities and not of the businessmen. And so this is a sort of it's a conceptual issue, and one really wonders how to crack it, right? How do you get to a place where you can convince a politician, in this case Modi, that this is what you need to do, when what he has done is surround himself largely with bureaucrats who are not naturally sympathetic to the point of view that I'm espousing.
No, absolutely. I love the line on gaming the rankings, but let me just take this debate forward. And Jaggi, coming to you, despite him not being able to deliver on the, the impossible tall promises that were made to business before he was elected in 2014, will industry still stick by Mr. Modi just because of the Tina factor? There is no alternative. The prospect of a Mahagathbandhan may not be very tempting to corporate India. Do you believe that's the one factor why the industry will continue to rally behind Mr. Modi?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you have a better bet than Mr. Modi right now, because he's been steadfastly fixing the plumbing. He's also taken the big initiatives, while he has got some major missteps, including probably demonetization. But the fact is, if anybody is going to carry the story forward and make sure that it works in the next couple of years, you are only going to have Modi. If you have a new government, whatever its shape, it will be quite a khichdi kind of a government. And not only will it start looking at all the decisions that have been taken in the last 4 years once again, which means you're going to have 2 more years of growth stalling unless some unknown factor comes to the aid of the thing. I think CEOs will see that, okay, we are not entirely happy with Modi, but I think the alternative is worse. And I think our best bet is to see that he corrects what may have gone wrong in the first 4 years, in the next 1 year, and of course in the next term if he happens to get one. But of course if he loses, then it's a different matter. But I don't think the CEOs will give up on Modi at this stage, however unhappy they are with him.
That's a fair point. But Mr. Aga, I want you to comment on that. This whole paranoia that we see in both business and markets on this sort of, alternate political alignment and the Mahagathbandhan, without speculating on what may or may not happen. But do we generally tend to be very unfair to sort of in judging coalition government with a, which is a consortium of regional parties? The critics believe that, we can't really move the needle. But there are many people who believe out there that if you look at the, at the trajectory of the Indian economy from mid-90s to now, we've moved in that 6 to 8% range. It doesn't matter whether it's a Congress in the center, a BJP at the center, or for that matter, a United Front government at the center, where we have the so-called dream budget. So what's the brouhaha all about?
No, Sandeep, I agree with you. I think I don't think there is such a thing as a corporate view or a promoter view or a managerial view or a bureaucratic view. They come in all shapes and sizes, and of course, you might say that a majority of promoters might favor a continuation of the Modi government, is a guess, but that is certainly not a unanimous or a completely coherent. They come in all shapes, and when you come below the promoter class, when you come to commentators like you or managerial class or bureaucratic class, I think they don't take this view as is there an alternative or is this Mahagathbandhan. They go by their likes or dislikes, preferences. A particular election result will come out, and that will come up. For all we may not have, even if you have a BJP government, it may also be a coalition government. It is very unlikely that you're going to have a BJP with 300 seats. So really, this argument of coalition or no coalition is a bit of a non-starter as far as I'm concerned.
Indeed. A quick last word, and I am always biased to any woman on my show. and which is why I'm going to take this across to Naina Lal Kidwai. And Naina, from now to 2019, will it be the CEO Narendra Modi who was asking industry for candid, frank suggestions, or will the flight back from Chhatrapati Shivaji Terminal in Mumbai to Indira Gandhi International Airport in Delhi ensure that the Garibo Ka Masaya Modi is back and inform which version of Modi must India Inc. believe over the next 10 months? The Man Ki Baat Modi or the Prime Minister listening intently to CEOs at that Mumbai Raj Bhavan today?
But you know, it's not an either or, is it? How could any business believe that any government could ignore India at every level? And we have to have every one of the policies that look at the SDGs, as India has agreed, the Sustainable Development Goals, achieved at every level, education, health, and indeed for every person to have the nutrition and sanitation that has been set out as their right. So that has to continue. And I don't see why one has to be at the cost of the other in terms of policy. But positioning, electioneering, if indeed, and I'm no authority on this, it's about getting a vote from the real India out there on the basis that you're knocking out the rich guy or knocking out corporate India, it can only be because it's a political rhetoric we feed them. I don't think people automatically think this way. But if they are fed this rhetoric, and it clearly was something that began to happen a couple of years ago, that, you know, demonetization, I think, was a class in point, where people believed, hey, we can actually get at the rich guy by therefore bearing the burden of standing in line to pull out our own cash from the bank. Well, if that's what electioneering is about, then clearly it is going to be about rich versus poor, but actually it shouldn't be, because industry, as I think was said earlier by a couple of people on the panel today, gives the jobs, gives the skills, ensures, and indeed through a lot of the activity that industry today engages in, and I'm quite familiar with some of this, there is a huge amount of community activity that is conducted, not just CSR work, but just pure community activity in terms of stewardship, water stewardship, etc. that happens by particularly big business in and around where they work. So that goodwill exists. And I think we would be doing a grave disservice if we made this separation and it became a political rhetoric.
Yeah, let's hope 2019 is not about rich versus poor, but about promises versus reality, and let the people of this country judge. Can't thank this wonderful panel for joining us in this edition of the India Development Debate. Naina Lal Kidwai, Sanjeev Aga, Sadanand Dume and R. Jagannathan. Really appreciate your thoughts and perspective as always on ET Now. Mr. Modi, of course, rode to power on the back of a large mass support and even great excitement on the part of Indian industry. Some impossible tall promises were made in corporate India that was sick of policy paralysis and corruption, put their faith in Narendra Modi. But 10 months away from general elections, the question today is, did Mr. Modi shut them out to blunt the suit boot allegation, and can he now bridge the trust deficit that has been created?
Indeed, the other big point to ponder over also is that the big cleanup, the formalization of the Indian economy, the war against NPA and the IBC has perhaps put Mr. Modi at loggerheads with some sections of Indian industry. The rules of doing business in India have changed, and so there will be those corporate captains who will be tough to win over. The answer to this and a lot more lies in a more frank, candid interaction between industry and government, and not an echo chamber. And the onus for this lies on the government and the government alone. Thank you very much for being with us. Up next is Top 10 at 10.
Good night.